Welcome, everybody. So my name is Molly. I'm with TriplePoint PR, and this is our second Technapex Education Tech event, and I'm so glad to see you guys all here. I see a few familiar faces and a few new faces, so that's always great. Just so you know, we have hashtag Technapex if you want your tweets to be seen on the screen. If you have any questions or comments about the conversation, you're welcome to join in. So we have some great panelists here today. We have investors from Bessemer, Impact at Scale, NewSchools Venture Partners, and Learn Capital. And we have Liz Gannes from AllThingsD moderating for us today. We're going to start with some introductions, and then we'll have time for a few questions at the end, and I'll let you take it away.
So hi, I'm Liz Gannes. I'm a reporter with All Things Digital. I am short normally, but I'm extremely short right now, standing below these guys. And hopefully if I step back, that's not going to make the mic go. But yeah, we're here to talk about investing in education startups. So I imagine that's something you're interested in hearing about. And these guys all have money to give away at the end of the night. So, you know, ask good questions and we'll see. So why don't we go ahead, start with Nathaniel introducing yourself.
All right. My name is Nathaniel. I'm a principal at Learn Capital. Learn Capital does early stage investment, seed and Series A, in sort of a variety of education technology companies. We're a few years old and know lots of folks in the room, and excited to have this conversation with lots of people that we know.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tabriz Verji. If any of you have sunglasses in your bags, if you wouldn't mind lending them to us for the next 30 minutes, these lights are pretty blinding. I'm serious about that, it's not a joke. Impact at Scale is a new seed fund focused on investing in what I call mission-driven technology entrepreneurs. Education technology is a core theme of mine. I've been an active investor there in the last year, still learning a lot, but I've made 3 investments. And my background is I've been an entrepreneur 2.5 times, so co-founding something twice and doing a turnaround once, and then was a sort of traditional VC for many years as well.
Hi, everybody. My name's Cook Wiley. I work at NewSchools Venture Fund. I spend most of my time with our seed fund, which invests in really early stage education technology companies. Many of you might know that the mission of NewSchools is really to make sure that all kids have access to great education, and especially underserved student populations. So I kind of represent this group on the mission-oriented investing, and I've been there for a while. My background is actually in private equity investing in software, so happy to be here.
Great. I guess I'll round things out. My name's Ethan Kurzweil. I'm with Bessemer Venture Partners. Been investing there for the past 4 years. I do 2 things for Bessemer. I focus on our consumer and mobile practice, as well as developer tools and platforms. And within consumer, I've always been looking actively at the education space. We made our first investment along that theme about 6 months ago in a company called Piazza. My personal background is I came from the media industry originally. I was actually at Liz's parent company, Dow Jones, for a number of years before I made the transition out to the West Coast and worked for a startup called Linden Lab. That was the company behind Second Life. And then joined Bessemer about 4 years ago. So I'm excited to talk to you all, hear your questions. Happy to be here.
So give us a little bit of a sense of what type of companies you invest in. There's a whole lot going on in education. There's nonprofit, for-profit, different levels of education, different tools. What's on limits, what's your scope, and what's off limits? Why don't we start with Ethan this time?
Sure. So Bessemer is a firm, we have a fairly flexible mandate in that we'll invest from very early stage to a very later stage, larger, almost growth equity investment. And so, within that, it's kind of up to us to define what are the criteria and what do we want to see before we're, comfortable making an investment in something. And the way I think about that question is almost similar to how I think about, a consumer internet investment or a mobile startup or something like that. And that's when you've reached the point where we can start to tell that you're impacting something and that you have some special connection with your users. And so for education, that could be lots of different things. In Piazza's case, we noticed that users were students were spending 3 or 4 hours a night using Piazza as like an essential part of their learning, and professors were saying, I'm changing the way I teach because of Piazza. And so anytime you see a consumer change or a fundamental change in the way things done, that's exciting. That gets venture capitalists or investors of all types really excited. And so that tends to be the kind of thing we look for. We're obviously looking as a venture firm for a business, for a profitable enterprise. And so that may not be apparent at the point when we invest. We may not know what shape that's going to look like. But we tend to look for the enabling factors. Again, a lot of engagement tends to mean you can build a business.
So NewSchools as a firm invests in both for-profit and nonprofit businesses. We think about it like we've got 3 main areas that we invest in. The first is in schools. So really where NewSchools got its start is in backing entrepreneurs that were leading charter management organizations across the country. We still do that, and that's where our bread and butter used to be. The second area of investment that we concentrate on is human capital. So we invest in a variety of different organizations that are training teachers. I know some of you out there are working at businesses that are doing this. We back a number of different nonprofit and for-profit enterprises that are focused on teacher training. And then the third area, and this is really where I focus. I work in some of our schools investments as well, but really I focus on our education technology investing. And we invest in EdTech companies that are enabling personalized learning for students, and really with a focus on low-income kids, both low-income really and other underserved populations such as special ed, such as ELL, et cetera. So that's how we think about our investing as a whole. NewSchools invest from seed stage up to call it Series B, maybe up to $3 to $5 million investments. On the seed fund, we make probably $50,000 to $250,000 investments in really early stage businesses, and we really focus on the technology piece of education.
So I think arguably my best investment is actually in a nonprofit called Kiva.org, but as a business, Impact at Scale is only for-profit companies, and so I think, Cook, you're sort of unique being on both sides of the fence, which is great. I am an angel and sort of seed stage investor, so doing typically very early stage companies. Once in a while, I'll participate in a Series A, but that's pretty rare. What I'm looking for in terms of companies, I'm agnostic to sort of areas within education, everything from K-12 to higher ed to lifelong learning. Really, it's more about teams, backing amazing teams and entrepreneurs who are focused on, solving really meaningful challenges and big problems. So it's like almost as much effort to build a small company as a big company. So I tend to sort of optimize for spending my time with really kind of potentially big ideas. They always start small and focused, but that potential is important. And in terms of teams, what I'm looking for is obviously passionate, relentless teams. But I think two of the things which are really important these days are teams that learn very, very quickly. So Ethan talked about sort of companies that have found product market fit, right? Have deep engagement with users. So when you're really early, you have a unique insight, which is the other thing that I look for. Someone who sort of brings some unique perspective to the table about the problem they're solving. But the teams that are ultimately really successful are the ones that can fail quickly, apply lean startup principles really well to ultimately find their way to that customer delight. One of the best examples of unique insight that I've seen recently is an entrepreneur, Daniel Yu, who's one of the founders of Goldbook, who was a Google engineer, went into education, and sort of unexpectedly learned, did like an extension to his education in special ed, and then went into East Palo Alto and worked in special education for a couple of years, and had some unique insights from that experience, and then applying his engineering background at Google to go solve a problem in that particular market.
To clarify how much money you can invest into first stage.
Sure. Right now, as an angel, I'm investing between $25,000 to $50,000. You know, I'm doing a new deal about every 6 weeks. So, you know, I've done 10 investments in the last year. And later this year, I'll be raising a fund, but it'll still be a seed fund. So it'll probably still be investing in like the 50 to 200K range.
So Learn Capital is like these guys, for-profit only education, primarily technology companies. There's a bias towards technology based on the scalability that we're looking for and the sort of the nature of the impact that we're hoping these companies have. I think that we have, we're pretty diverse in the set of things that we invest in. We certainly have a core practice around things that intersect in some way with K-12, which has a lot to do with both theses of where impact is going to be had, as well as sort of the background of the partners. But we are really excited about a lot of things that are changing. I think one of the things that's very exciting in this space is that these sort of subgenres of the education technology market are just sort of flowering right now. And you see a lot of connections, stuff that wasn't necessarily formerly thought of as education. We look a lot at this domain we call employability, which is right where the intersection of skills and jobs come together. We have a sort of a structural bias towards Series A, but also do seed deals. So it's anywhere between 250,000 or even a little bit lower for some of the seed stuff to 1 to 3 million when we're doing Series A. And I think, I guess sort of modeling off of what you just said, Tabriz, the thing that we tend to look for most is a combination of sort of educational experience with what we always refer to in the office as sort of Silicon Valley DNA. I think one of the really exciting things that's happening is that this sort of Silicon Valley consumer web experience, expertise, mindset of iteration, of lean startup, of all these things that you hear about sort of ad nauseum on panels like this is intersecting in a really big way with folks who have been interested in education reform for a while. And that's a pretty powerful combination. So we definitely tend to look for entrepreneurs who have either represented in themselves or their teams both of those sort of ways of thinking.
If you had to name one thing or one company, one idea that you think is the best example of success in the ed tech space right now, what would you say? We can stop with the firing line if you want, but jump in.
I'm going to take it from a perspective that will be obvious from Learn Capital's perspective, but maybe a little bit different than just success broadly. One thing that we're really excited about that's changing is different distribution channels to get to students. So this is a core sort of thesis that we think. So the consumer web, one of the things that was amazing about it is that you go straight to your actual end users, right? Your products have to sort of be able to satisfy the demand of the people who are actually using them. In an enterprise model, and as schools have sort of a version of an enterprise model, the decision maker is different ultimately than the end user. So you've seen over the last few years what we call the consumerization of enterprise technology, where instead of an IT manager buying the communication software for everyone, they just start using Yammer, right? We're seeing the same thing inside education a little bit, where teachers are actually adopting software built around a freemium model instead of having to go to a school or district level. So the company that we have that sort of did that first is Edmodo, which is a social learning platform that basically creates a vehicle for teachers and students to communicate in a way that resembles the sort of other social communication channels that they use in other parts of their lives. And so
the idea is instead of selling to someone who buys technology, you get adopted by someone who needs what you're doing.
Teacher picks it up, starts using it for free, really likes it, shares it with other teachers, and again, like all sort of more consumerized plays, the financial model looks a little bit different than just a pure sort of sales to schools or sales to district model. So we really like that theme and think that's a good success in that space.
I agree with you on the theme. I think on the specific example, I guess my answer would be a bit different in that it's really too early to tell. I can't point to anything yet that I would deem an unqualified success. I mean, I think Edmodo is doing a lot of really interesting things, and there's certainly a lot of companies that are showing early promise. It's very early innings in this, and that's why for everyone who's here, it's an exciting time to be talking about this, because it's not like I don't know, cloud technologies where we're looking back in the middle of the game and we know a little bit how things are going to evolve. This is really early, and there's a lot of interesting technologies and interesting approaches to the problems that Nathaniel and others have spoken to, but the future is really wide open. I mean, there's schools, classrooms, learning is still largely happening in very traditional ways, the same ways that happened when I was in college, 15 years ago. And so I'm excited about what we'll see. I think on the nonprofit side, there's been a lot of innovation. In terms of technology, not yet, not so much.
I agree with everything that's been said so far, and it's a little success for us. But what we're really excited about, so we've got a business called Class Dojo that's basically selling classroom behavior management software. And like both of these guys just said, right now it's very early innings in terms of revenue models and in terms of distribution strategies. Not selling, but distributing directly to technology and product users. The separation between buyers and users is, it's a clear problem. Everybody knows about it in K-12. What's been really exciting for us with Class Dojo is that these guys are they're just starting to be able to monetize their solution so that they can subsidize selling or giving their solution away to really low income districts. So a classroom behavior management solution, you guys can probably can tell that has a lot of really good impact characteristics for low income districts. So we're excited that Class Dojo is able to, and shows a lot of promise in being a business model that can sell to districts that can pay for it, but can also give its product away to districts that NewSchools cares the most about, and the student populations that we care the most about impacting.
So you're excited about that hybrid model is what you're saying?
Yeah, we're excited. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. No, thanks, DeBreeze. No.
Answer was yes. So of like the 50 companies you guys invested, you're going to pick the one that I was going to talk about. But I think we're all three actually invested in that company.
Excited about Goldbook, too.
Well, I'm actually not an investor in Goldbook, but you are. Not yet.
Is
at
that
least.
common? I mean,
Not
how
yet, at
many
least.
companies are the four of you co-invested in?
We probably have the most overlap with NewSchools just because our portfolios are biggest, I would say, at this point. But I think we're up to like 26 or 27, so we probably have a lot of
Total.
Yeah.
And then so you have,
Yeah,
Yeah.
not overlapping, just total. So we have
how
a lot
many do you
of-
think overlap?
I don't know. It's not that many. It's probably like 3 or 4 at this point.
I was just about to say 3 or 4.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about EdTech is I find that the investors are far more collaborative than sort of more traditional investing. Like we're all exchanging notes and ideas, and it's actually it's a great sort of ecosystem in that sense. To your earlier question, one of the things that I've been encouraged by, so all 3 investments I've made are great examples of consumerization of technology. Like they're all going direct, whether it's to teachers or to parents, kids directly. And as I've been learning and understanding sort of the challenges and opportunities with respect to selling directly to schools, now we're talking mostly about K-12, I think you guys actually have some things in your portfolio that are starting to break through. Like they're seeing, consumer internet type growth, like 8x year-over-year revenue selling through the bureaucratic school channels, right? So the question is, how far can that scale? And Ethan's point, it's early, but there's some pretty encouraging early signs in terms of, being able to take advantage of the ecosystems that have been created, like Edmodo and other things, to kind of, now navigate the sales channel much more quickly.
So if there aren't examples of big successes, are there any acquirers for EdTech companies?
So I would say that we are not sure yet what the next generation of acquirers are going to be. There's a bunch of obvious players, the big publishing companies that are trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do, and they have sort of specific domains and properties that overlap with a lot of these new things. The interesting question is to what extent those are going to be, it's going to be the obvious players, like those guys, versus non-obvious players, people who have an interest in talking to that type of consumer. Like Google is messing around with the space, but it's not like they've been super active on the acquisition front. So this is one.
Has anyone been super active? What are some acquisitions you guys can think of?
So Chegg has been the most active acquirer, I would say, of education technology companies.
Plato's been active.
Plato.
Snail at SoCom, you were telling me earlier that I wasn't aware of this, but K-12, which is a pretty big company in the space, has actually been very acquisitive as well.
Yep.
But I think that, and then so Fox and Murdoch bought Wireless Generation, and they're sort of become like there's a big three, and then they're sort of like the fourth big channel into the schools. And so I think that their plan is to be more acquisitive.
I think it's interesting that the fact that a lot of the likely acquirers or the big players in the space are not actually known for their technology is actually that's a big deal here, because what it suggests to me, and I think maybe this is part of Cheg's strategy, is that there's going to be a lot of room for startups to stake out their space and actually build large companies before they hit big competitive pressures from big companies. Now, a lot of times investors, we don't worry about that too much because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of startups can do anything, they can compete with anybody. But the truth is, it's a lot easier when you're really the only person building technology and leveraging a lot of the trends that these guys spoke to really well around consumerization of the enterprise and just the internet. Leveraging the internet is not something that the publishing houses have a lot of experience doing. And the internet is going to impact education. I don't think anyone would argue otherwise. So that's one of the things that makes me excited about this is specific to the question that you asked.
So it seems like some of the largest scale bets in this space, and I know not necessarily all of you are involved in them, are on university scale or university level online teaching. There's been just huge amounts of funding going into that, huge names like Harvard and MIT most recently jumping into this. Is that an investment opportunity? Is that a startup opportunity for people to get involved with those, or are these just kind of like people who are big in some other market now coming into this one?
Well, I think if you look at, I was going to say, if you look at companies like Straighterline or Coursera or Minerva, which,
Minerva gets a, what does that mean?
Yeah, 25 million seed round out of the gate, one guy and an idea. And then, there's University Now.
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah, no. I think it's, look, I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I think that, it speaks to two things, right? One is, sort of when you start playing in sort of formal accreditation, like there's sort of table stakes and requirements there that just are more capital intensive. But they are all startups. It's not incumbents that are coming in and really doing it. And I think it's just a huge category, right? The bulk, there's so much money spent and there's so many of these companies which, forgive me, but they just shouldn't exist, right? The University of Phoenix's that charge you walk away with $60,000 to $80,000 worth of debt and a very poor quality education that doesn't really help you that much in getting a job. Like, there are proven models to disrupt cost by an order of magnitude or more, and the quality of education by an order of magnitude or more. So there's a 100x opportunity for entrepreneurs focused on that problem set. So I think that's you're going to see some big companies created and disrupted in that category.
I think one of the things that's most interesting about this space, and I don't know if anyone knows how this plays out, is that you kind of have potential disruptions to this market that are going to manifest in maybe 2 years, going to manifest in 5 years, going to manifest in 10 years, going to manifest in 15 years. You may never see any of them manifest, but different investors, I think, have different intuitive, sometimes it's intentional, but sometimes I think it's just intuitive biases around what's going to hit first and how it aligns with their investing goals now. So what I mean by that is that there's a big difference in putting money in a company that is building supplemental video content for Common Core standards, which have emerged, lots of states have adopted them. There's probably a market that's going to be filled out for that, versus a totally new type of like online, like higher ed replacement, which maybe in 15 years or 10 years or 5 years, depending on your belief system, may start to compete with traditional university degrees for sort of representing skills, but maybe not.
Yeah, that seems fair, but it also seems like that space in particular is moving at warp speed. I mean, those Stanford classes that were so well attended by hundreds, tens of thousands of people were last fall, right?
Yeah.
And now there's like 3 startups that have been
totally.
founded out of that.
I think that one, I think that from the standpoint of understanding an economic misalignment, the conversation in higher ed is the strongest right now. And I think particularly in Silicon Valley, because you have tons and tons of startups walking around here who like want the best programmers regardless of where they got their education. So I think that the conversation is heightened even here because we happen to live in an ecosystem in which the dominant skill set is one that you can actually prove in a way that's different than a degree. That's subjective. But I think that you're right. I think that it is on warp speed, and I think that part of it has to do with just the overwhelm. Like, we hit a point; it's been creeping up, but as soon as we hit the point where student debt hit $1 trillion and half of graduates are going home to their parents and not having jobs, like, it's just you're not going to have energy around that. I don't know whether that necessarily means it's like the best place to invest. I think that we're super excited about a lot of that stuff. Udemy is an investment that we're really, really jazzed on for those reasons. But I think it's one where like people feel right now in their guts that something has to give, and so that you're seeing a dozen different approaches to what that's going to be.
Right, and I think one interesting point to make, and it might be self-evident, is the kind of monopoly on accreditation and what that means with what's going on. I concentrate on K through 12, so I can't pretend to be an expert on what's going on. It's definitely exciting, and when you see technology, technological infrastructure enabling people to learn from the best instructors anywhere, anytime, that's going to continue to happen. But it's really interesting to me to see how that monopoly on accreditation, how that plays out. If you're a student, you need a diploma to get certain jobs. So at least in my own head, I haven't played out how somebody like Coursera or Udacity or whoever, how they're going to play into that market. So maybe just food for thought, but it's something that I'm thinking about.
I think this discussion highlights something that we've kind of talked around a little bit, but which is actually really interesting and really fundamental here. And it's we all know when you start a company, you're taking all kinds of risks. You're taking market risk, you're taking technology risk in some cases, you've got execution, you've got all sorts of things. Here there's another dimension that's present in some other industries and not in most, and that's that you've got regulatory risk. You've got companies being started today that may not actually be legal, and that they're counting on some kind of
What are you worried about?
Arcane accreditation rules or rules as to what you can put online in some cases. What's the standard called? FERPA? Is that the right term? I think there's something called FERPA. I think of it like the HIPAA for education, where there's rules about what kind of data you can expose and how. It's an area that's got a lot of stakeholders, and it requires that requires government intervention in a lot of cases to kind of oversee the quality of education that we get. And it reminds me a little bit of kind of what PayPal was doing in the early days, when what they were doing in terms of setting up an alternative banking system was illegal, and that part of their plan was to count on changing the regulatory framework to make that possible. And I think some of these startups, Ben's in particular, Minerva, has that as their premise, that they're going to be able to move the landscape in a certain way that he specifically would like to see, and it's just interesting, and it's scary, but it also creates great opportunity at the same time.
All right, hopefully this is a crowd pleaser question. If you give good answers, what do you want to invest in right now? What is the hole in your portfolio that you want to fill? What are some ideas that you're hoping people will bring to you? You can't please the crowd unless you talk.
Pass.
All right, go ahead.
No, I was kidding.
Okay, all right, I'll put something really funky, just in the interest of the crowd pleaser comment. So Cook talked about Class Dojo, and I think what's very interesting about what they're doing is that they are focused on sort of the other half of education that most people don't think about, right? The development of your character and you as a person. And I think that there are, some really interesting opportunities there. I was having, so one thing that I think could be really interesting, this is really wacky, but if you look at studies around sense of humor, it turns out that developing and learning a sense of humor becomes one of the most important sort of life determinants of happiness. It affects how you relate to people, like your friends, in your relationships, throughout your life, your business career. There's a very high correlation between people who sort of adapted skills, not a particular type of humor, it can be anything, but just people who've adapted those types of skills and how they fare in life. So it's a pretty wacky idea, but I would love to talk to an entrepreneur who is focused on cultivating that for people on a sort of ubiquitous level.
I think in general, the internet has always been a democratizing force in terms of giving access to new forms of information, and new connections between people, new forms of organizing and things like that. So this is a very non-specific answer and probably isn't all that helpful, but there's no better place to do that than in education, where we really want it. I mean, that's part of the fundamentals of this country, is to give people equal opportunity. So to the extent we can use the internet and we can use technology to give more access to more people, more connections, that is what I want to fund. And so that's very broad, and how do you operationalize that? The way we thought through Piazza when we made that investment was that they were originally created to solve a problem that the founder had, in that she didn't feel comfortable approaching people to study with them and get answers to her questions, and didn't feel comfortable in the kind of informal learning environments that get created in universities and get created all along the way. And so she created a product that reduced those barriers, that enabled her to connect with other people in her classes and outside of her classes to learn better. And so that was one aspect of using the internet for that goal. And I think there's many, many more.
So I have a general answer now and a specific answer. The general answer kind of goes back to another thing that I think that we dance around but don't get directly at, specifically in conversations about education technology, but I think to some extent with ed reform in general, which is a question of the fundamental underlying purpose of education. Every investment that we make, every decision that we make in terms of what startup we're going to start, is to some extent us advocating a vision of what the purpose of education is. When we make a startup to do Common Core related stuff, that is to some extent affirming that as a structure and the sort of the way that we organize K-12 as the right way to go about it. When we create a startup that is about democratizing access to great teachers, that has to do with what we believe the purpose of education is. And I think that we all have sort of common sort of intuitive senses, or a lot of us do, around education being related to employment, or education being related to success. But I don't think that we always sort of surface what the real purpose that we're driving at is. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have, particularly in the context of the set of skills that we're providing people with. I think a lot about something that I like to call the aspiration gap, which is the difference in the belief set of students about what they can achieve and what success looks like. I think that you have very, very fundamentally different belief sets about what the purpose of learning is among people, and I think that it's widening right now. And I think that the things that I believe make people successful, particularly around places like Silicon Valley, are not necessarily the things that we teach in school. They're the things that we sort of almost pejoratively label soft skills and hope that they happen along the way. Things like self-efficacy, confidence, humor. It's hard to get at those things, but I bet you that just like there's a really good way to teach algebra and some not really good ways to teach algebra, you could do better at teaching those things. So I'm really interested in constantly keeping an eye out for things that are going after that set of skills in an intentional way, in a way that has, and from this is me personal, not just Learn Capital. I think that's a really important area. One thing that I'd love to see more of, so this is the specific answer, I think that the structure of careers is very clearly changing to be a set of related projects where you jump between and you have to establish a personal brand and you have to know the tools of social media and all this sort of stuff. And we're moving into an economy that has Etsy and Kickstarter and Fab and all these incredible things that you can use to build a very different looking career. We don't have anyone who's teaching you how to do that. And I don't think it's just for kids. I think, my mom and my dad are coming up on retirement and they make these awesome clocks and someone needs to teach them how to use Etsy. And I've tried a bunch, but I can't do it. And so if I saw a startup that was like Career 2.0, the Etsy economy, here's how you teach it, here's how you learn it, here's how you bring down the barriers to economic self-sufficiency around the things that you create
Turn
and
your
make.
hobby into a business.
Totally. I would find a way to fund that, whether it was Learn Capital or not. Let's just put it that way. You teach my mom how to use Facebook. Yeah. There's going to be a Facebook mom class. My mom would love to be in that too.
So I think, so I'm kind of going to piggyback on what some of these guys have said. One investment that we're about to announce that I'm really excited about, and I know this goes back to a previous question, but can't pre-announce it now. Now is not the time. Apologies. It's a business that I think it's going to be tough to scale, and this is part of what I and NewSchools sees our role as, is funding businesses that will be potentially tough to scale, but that fulfill a fundamental need that's out there and that's not being met for various reasons. So what Nathaniel just said is super important to New Schools and to how we look at investments, and to our philanthropic capital and where we see that fit in, right? One investment that we're about to make now, or about to close on, is a business that is basically, it's a college readiness business that is closing that gap, or trying to close that gap between what students see as possible and what their peers who have graduated and gone on to college, what they have done. So through basically local video networks, this business, aspires to basically close that gap between students that are, perhaps in low-income environments that don't have the support structures around them. This business basically helps provide that through near-peer networks. So we're really excited about that. Look out for an announcement. I know that's not exactly what the question is. Anyway, what I'm excited about right now, also kind of piggybacks on what Tabriz is saying, and that's not because I call Tabriz for advice every now and again. One of the businesses that we just looked at is a gaming company that is seeking to diagnose and solve a lot of the non-cognitive problems that low-income kids have. For instance, impulsiveness or self-control is the cause of so many problems for kids in low-income environments. And we just spoke with a business that the entrepreneur he's an academic, and he's got tech talent on his team, but he's seeking to basically build games that help diagnose those problems and then help solve them. So that's non-cognitive focused games like that. It's really aspirational, but it's really exciting that somebody's trying to do something like that. So,
Cook, I think you touched on something that ought to be said outright, and I don't know if your question also got to what we ought to be solving from a nonprofit perspective.
Take it
but
over there.
I'm gonna answer that question too, because I want it answered. And that's that we do have a fundamental problem in this country, and it's been measured a lot around equal access to things, especially around education, where there's a big equality gap in terms of where you're born, what race you are, and lots of other factors determine the access that you get to things. And there are a lot of one nonprofit that I'm on the board of that I'm excited about that's tackling this particular problem is this nonprofit New Leaders. Actually, we're fortunate to have New Schools as one of our big backers, is geared around one methodology for solving that problem around principal recruitment and training. But this is an unsolved problem. It's going to take the best minds applying technology, applying programmatic things, applying just getting people fired up about these issues so that there are solutions. So I think whether it comes from a nonprofit or a for-profit or wherever enterprise, there ought to be, and I think there is, a lot of excitement around solving that problem too.
All right, we have some time for audience questions, but you might not be able to be behind one of these lights when you raise your hand, because I'm not sure I would see you. But go ahead and let us know if you have one. Go ahead.
Thought about distant learning.
About what?
Distant learning. What's wrong and what's right with it?
I'm sorry? Can you clarify?
So in education, whenever we're really trying to create this distant learning where it makes it accessible for everybody, but the problem is engagement. It's how do you keep these kids engaged? How do you keep kids engaged with distant learning? There's not a teacher, there's not somebody there, but it also creates scalability.
Well, I'm excited to hear the view of these folks that have perhaps looked at this problem more, but I just point out that I think that's perhaps a symptom that technology and a lot of the consumer internet phenomenon that we've solved other problems with could be applied to. Things like gamifying that somebody said earlier can help engage people in a remote way so that they feel vested in something. Frankly, just giving people community, which we've done really well through social networks, is another potential problem to making people across distances still feel engaged. So I guess I can't point to a specific company, but I think a lot of what we've done to solve other problems on the internet will be applicable here.
I would agree. I mean, anytime you see sort of consumerization in sort of technology, allowing people to directly access the ability to learn, that's in a way, right, it's distance learning. But I think there's some interesting folks that are humanizing that. Allison over there was on the panel 2 months ago at Insta.edu, is matching college students with other students that are trying to learn. And need to be matched up with someone who can give them extra coaching. So they may be watching a Khan Academy video and maybe they're playing a game, but they're still struggling with some concepts, and so they can actually tap into the power of technology and the internet to talk to a live person. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. One of the companies I invested in is called EduCreations, and it's like a crowdsourced Khan Academy. So they've created a platform. It's the top education app for iPad. So lots of great teachers can create lessons and ultimately share those lessons, and it's accessible to everyone. So I think we've had a very US-centric sort of frame and mindset here, but I mean, these things are having a huge impact globally, right? Because they're all open and people anywhere can access them. So in terms of access to opportunity and sort of leveling the playing field globally, there's some pretty exciting things happening.
I'm sure you can speak more to this sort of from the NewSchools perspective, but I think a lot of the way that people are trying to sort of address these things is every challenge is an opportunity, and this is where the field of sort of blended learning models comes in, where they're trying to combine the best of the scalability that distance offers, plus figure out what sort of is required, what cohort learning means, what's important about it, what teacher facilitation looks like, how it could change. I would just add, I guess, one thing to that, which is that ultimately, I think that the modality of learning matters. I also think that people's motivation and presumption of relevance matters a lot too. So if we're teaching the same stuff that people don't find relevant and they don't understand why it connects to their future in a meaningful way, it doesn't matter if we deliver it really well or really poorly, they're still going to be disengaged.
All right, next question. Go ahead.
I was wondering, where do you think the knowledge about how best to teach and also implement teaching in educational technology will come from? And in particular, what role do you think that, let's say, scientific research from cognitive science, psychology, education, and so on will play a role? Because I do research in cognitive science and education, and even in classrooms, they often don't implement this research, but there's sort of a huge body in academia on how you can improve learning, but it hasn't been put in their context because academics tend to be not very practical. But on the other hand, everyone's implementing something separate in education without sort of seeing what knowledge has been there before. And so it's especially interesting because online stuff is really magical in the sense that you can actually do experiments in the real world. So there's sort of a lot of opportunity there. So I'm not sure to what extent you see that happening, or you think that knowledge is relevant, if it's not going to be relevant because this is a new area.
So is the question basically to what extent is cognitive science going to have in kind of the online learning?
I guess research in general. So cognitive science,
research.
There's also work in anthropology.
Right.
Research in general.
Right. Okay. It's actually a good question for people here because I've talked to a few entrepreneurs that are building businesses they're actually taking a different approach than most consumer internet businesses would take. They're actually doing the research up front, and their products are backed by reputable research. So there's a few different examples of it, and I think a lot of it depends on what you're trying to do. Obviously, if you're selling content to K-12 students, that content's going to need to be, it depends on the way it's going to be used, but it needs to be research backed, at least for NewSchools. If you're developing a tool that teachers can use as either supplemental learning or content delivery or something like that, that doesn't need to be, you can do kind of lean startup style, develop an MVP, get a bunch of feedback early, and develop your product that way. But this is frankly, a challenge that NewSchools has in investing in content is, what is great content, what validates great content, what kind of research needs to back content, because so much of it depends on the delivery method as well as the research that's behind the content. But it's like the example I used earlier. We've seen some really exciting kind of like that gaming company I was talking about earlier is an interesting example of a purely research-backed company that is trying to develop a good way to engage students. They have the research, now they're figuring out how students can actually engage with it.
I think it's actually going to be increasingly important because there's so much interesting stuff happening in that context. And I think the best entrepreneurs that I've seen, they are gathering unique insight from those environments. So one of my other entrepreneurs, Robbie John at Tap to Learn, when I met him, half of our conversation was around that. And he literally, he knew all the top behavioral scientists. He was talking to them. He was gleaning insights. He sent me links to 50 TED videos and other things, right? So he was absolutely on top of that, even though he hadn't been in that field. You guys might have heard of Lumosity, Lumos Labs, another friend of mine who started that, and his co-founder, they were deeply rooted in sort of neuroscience and learning and from an academic context. Even Class Dojo that we talked about, those guys were CS PhDs. One of them was in the classroom, and so how it said, wow, behavior management's the biggest problem for teachers, but they also were tied in with a bunch of leading researchers who provided them with the insight that the best way to affect behavior is through real-time feedback, and that educated the product pretty significantly. So I personally think it's really important. I'm actually spending a lot of time these days looking at the frontiers of technology and brain science. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in hacking the brain. I think we're going to see the intersection of hardware, software in these environments actually being pretty neat. I've seen startups that are incorporating use of a $99 device that tracks your brain waves to help you tune learning of different kinds. So there's going to be some really neat stuff happening.
So entrepreneurs are famous for ignoring science and research, just generally speaking. That's your prototypical example of an entrepreneur, somebody hacking away, putting something out there, who cares what's come before, ignoring all research and academia and everything like that. So I'm going to take a little bit of the contrarian view. I agree with a lot of what you guys said, but just to play out the other argument, I think it's equally likely that what we see being successful in this space is the entrepreneurial approach of rapid iteration, quick, lean startup, as mentioned earlier, quick revs on an idea or a concept that may have no scientific validity whatsoever, but just kind of makes sense to somebody, and then we'll see and we'll let the market decide. Now, I'm sorry, what was your name again? Joseph. So you don't need to Joseph. You don't need to abandon your academic perch yet, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs will build platforms on which there'll be content developed and there'll be approaches that have scientific validity and rigor to them. But I don't know that I'd necessarily bet that the startup that has the most impact in this space will be that well researched. I think it'll be the result of a lot of experiments that yield something that then takes off and then we study later.
Do you guys mind leaving us with one source for further education information, staying in touch? So a book, a Twitter handle, a conference people should attend, some recommendation of where they could find a similar community to talk about people with these issues. I'm going to give you free leeway to be totally self-promotional, and I'll start on that note by saying you can follow me on Twitter at Liz Gannes. And I like writing about education startups, and my last name is spelled kind of funnily, so it's Gannes. And that's an easy way to find me, or you can come up to me after this and I can give you an email address, so old school. But go ahead. We only have one mic now.
The two newsletters that I spend the most time with are Mindshift, which is a KQED newsletter, and EdSurge, which is like everyone knows, but I think that they're really both well put together and have a ton of stuff. I think honestly though, the best way to engage with this is to talk to lots of other entrepreneurs. I mean, we see these massive shifts in we'll see 4 companies in a single space over the course of a couple weeks pop up. Actually, it's a really interesting one. Angel.co/education. If you want to see what people are doing, there's a ton. Every company at this point.
So that's
puts
the
up,
angel list category.
It's the angel list category for education. It's a really interesting way. You can filter by what's popular this week, what's popular this month, or just newest.
So you can all follow me on Twitter at Ethan Kurz, but actually that's not going to address your question at all, because it's some of what I talk about, but I talk about lots of other things too, including what my son did in terms of what we fed him last night too. So that's going to distract you from the core of how do we follow about education. I think the best way to do that is to find the startups that you think are really interesting and follow the entrepreneurs behind them, as was said, because I think that's where you're going to hear a lot of the cutting edge experimental thought is going to reside there. And so perhaps going through an angel list and picking your favorites and then refreshing that every once in a while, and then reading the press and then finding who are the interesting people that are doing something really cool and different, and let's try to get inside their head so we learn about what's out there.
Liz, I think you asked about conferences, and if you get in, their conference is the one to be at. But there's a lot going on. I mean, just next month, Launch is doing something exclusively around EDU. South by had a whole EDU track. There's like great meetups and groups like this. And like I said, I think there's a real sense of community within the space. I think just plugging in and building relationships and showing up. 80% of it is showing up.
Yeah, ditto. I think that reading the blogs is important, and EdSurge is obviously a great source of news, and it's well put together. And there are a number of really thoughtful blogs. One of Nathaniel's partners, everybody knows Tom Vander Ark. Getting Smart is well done too. But yeah, I think there's no substitute for seeing these guys in person. I mean, that's how I think this group gets to first see a lot of entrepreneurs and to see kind of what they think about and how they think and really how you start to interact with people. Those initial connections, they can't be understated. And yeah, we would love to see you guys at our summit. So it just happened. So we'll get there in a year. EdSurge. Yeah, EdSurge.
All right. Thank you very much.